Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us here at Gary's Book Club, the afternoon edition on Wednesday here at the International CES. Very happy you could join us, and I want to welcome to the stage Scott Steinberg, author of my well-worn copy of Make Change Work for You. I'm Tyler Suiters with the communications team at CEA. And Scott, welcome. I know you're a veteran of the show. It's great to have you back with us.
No, I'm glad to be back after about 10 years. I was impressed. I actually got lunch this year, too. That's a first. The most important thing to see at CES, right?
It's a step in the right direction. So before we dive into the book, how about some veteran insight as someone who's been to so many CES before, what you look for,
right,
and also your strategy for navigating our show floor, and this year what are more than 3,600 exhibitors.
I was going to say, well, the first thing off the top of my head would be to look for the big trends as a whole, not simply look for specific devices or innovations. And the best way you can do that is to breeze by some of the larger booths, get a sense as to what's being pushed, whether that is automotive technology, whether that is wearables, robotics, and then you can start to zero in on some of the more innovative companies or some of the more interesting things coming out of startups or unknown companies as well, maybe hit the sand. So I think the secret is basically go for the big picture and then start to zero in from the top. I
think that's a good strategy, and I took that myself actually yesterday working on some content for us and the CES crew. I was in the gaming center, which is now transitioning into what I would call immersive entertainment as a category header, and spent some time with Oculus and with Snail Games. What's caught your eye as far as those categories that you've seen?
Yeah, I would definitely say the Oculus is pretty darn impressive. There's a lot of VR headsets out there right now. Samsung's got some pretty neat stuff, Arcos as well. And it's pretty amazing what's going on in that space, especially when it comes to connectivity. But I would also say, you know, don't just look at the specific hardware. Also look at what's taking place on Facebook, what's taking place on your phone, your tablet. There's some amazing games out there that people can access. And in fact, of course, if you look on the PlayStation 4 or Xbox One as well, some pretty sick stuff. Yeah.
But
I will neither admit nor deny, you know, how much time is being spent.
But we are actually working right now.
Right,
so on to official business. Let me give a little bit of your bio, Scott, just so our audience knows exactly where you're coming from and your strengths and expertise. So to put a label on you, strategic consultant, professional speaker. But you're also a very strong writer. You've been in more than 600 outlets. This is cool. The #1 ranked technology expert according to Google. That's pretty awesome.
That's not too bad, yeah. It makes for fun conversation, yes.
Yeah. Some of the outlets where I've seen you and doing research along with the book include Fast Company, Rolling Stone, very cool, Entrepreneur as well. So with those as the objective elements of your background, give us some of the subjective, how you wound up here and found this field.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually started out, I had a website when I was back in college. We wanted free video games, free gadgets. Can't imagine why a college student would want that,
Selfish motives, of course.
Yeah, maybe. So we started reviewing them, posting those online, and we got invited to more and more press opportunities and got to find out more about the industry, meet more editors. And I got to tell you, the world opened up. It is amazing what technology did for us, what video games did for us. And you know, it's one of these days I figure we'll get a real job, but maybe not so soon. This has been an amazing journey. So yeah.
Well, I think the term futurist can be applied rather loosely to a lot of different personalities or professional categories. I'm curious how comfortably you wear that mantle. And I point to the subheader of your book, 10 Ways to Future-Proof Yourself, Fearlessly Innovate and Succeed Despite Uncertainty. But future-proofing yourself especially catches my eye.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting piece of it, right, is having freelanced, having had to make my own way, figure out how you stay at the forefront of this business, which is so fast-changing, as you can see here at CES today. It's just amazing compared to last year, the year before that. You know, a big piece of it is constantly evolving, thinking about how you can adapt your strategy to stay ahead of it, and anybody who's been in this business for even a microsecond knows how quickly it evolves. And I think, you know, the mantle of futurist, I don't know if I would call myself that, and naturally, it's certainly not what you get called at cocktail parties. Yeah. But I think what happens is, you know, once you start to dig a little bit deeper in the business, once you think about what you want your career to be, you have to start thinking several steps ahead, and inevitably that means looking at tomorrow and what you can do to plan for it today.
Let's dive into some of the strategies behind the book. And first and foremost is an acronym that you rely on rather heavily, FEAR, which in and of itself certainly catches your attention when you're talking about change overall. But that's an acronym for focus, engage, assess, and react. So almost a 4-step process there.
Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward process for tackling any problem or any challenge that you would have in life or business, and it's essentially to take a look at the problem, to really define it, come up with an action plan, a strategy for tackling it, and then put that strategy into place, and based on the results that you get and the feedback that you get, constantly course correct and adapt that strategy. So it's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward, and I think it works for just about any problem or challenge that you're going to come across. You know, honestly, all the best of us can do, you know, unless you've got a crystal ball that works, is to make a plan, act on that plan, and then react as you go and keep improving going forward.
Well, let's take this one step at a time now. First of all, focus. A broad term that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. Can you specify that a little bit, maybe narrow it down for us?
Yeah, well, what we're talking about is you got to be objective about the problem that you have and think about ways that you can deal with it. You know, maybe you want to break into the technology industry, maybe you want to be a technology or video game writer. Well, it's one thing to say that, it's another to think about what would the system be for going about doing that, and that would mean probably you'd have to meet editors, probably you'd have to have a writing portfolio. So really think about what the challenge is before you, and then how you're going to go about taking some simple steps to address the problems or challenges that you face.
Engage is a verb we use regularly in the communications field, but it applies, again, fairly broadly in many senses. But there's some element of interactivity there. Engagement isn't just a strategy that you can apply, that requires some reciprocity as well, right?
Well, I think the big piece with engagement is taking action, and that seems to be the part that oftentimes stymies a lot of people or hinders them a little bit from moving forward, is you say, well, you know, I'm not qualified to do that, I've never done that in the past. You know, the big thing is learning, taking the chance, qualifying yourself, being willing to make that leap and put yourself out of your comfort zone and really think about, okay, well, here's the challenge, here's how I'd go about addressing it, now I actually have to do something to address that. And then once you've begun to do that, then you can adapt your strategy as you go. It's never going to be a perfect time, nobody's ever going to tell you you're qualified, you just got to do it and learn as you go.
Let's dive down on that a little bit, Scott, because fear, is, taking it as a term, not just an acronym here, can be a hindrance to engagement, but also can be a motivator, as I see it, right?
That's right. It can actually spur you into action. It can let you know when you may be lacking in skills or experience, or you may be falling behind in your workplace or in your career. You know, really it can be a motivator that can spur you into taking action, addressing some of these challenges, filling in those gaps in your skill set, or saying, okay, well, maybe our products, our company seems to be falling a little bit behind in the marketplace. What could we really do to think about what tomorrow's customer is going to need, and how could we go about putting that in place today?
Assess.
Right.
This seems to be, now this is a little more maybe reactive or passive, and then you're sitting back, right?
Well, this is a very important piece of it as well, right? Is really being able to be objective and take a look at what results of your actions produce, because if you keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, even as the challenges before you are changing, the world is constantly turning, not necessarily going to produce the same results, let alone as successfully over time. So you really have to drill down and say, okay, you know, based on the strategy that I took, what response did I achieve? What results did I get? And then based on those results, how could I adapt my strategy to be more successful going forward?
And then finally react. You've put all the preparatory steps in place, and if you've done it well, I assume the reaction is to some degree relatively easy, right?
Well, that would be to iterate and course correct, to evolve your strategy over time. At the end of the day, like we were saying, you can't simply keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, because value and relevancy are changing, you know, it's going to produce diminishing returns. So really you have to think about, based on what I did, how could I do better next time, and keep doing better and better and better with each new successive effort going forward. Okay.
Let's delve a little more deeply into the book, Scott, and I know you won't mind if I read a few passages out loud.
Help yourself.
I feel slightly hesitant reading an author's work to himself, but off we go. A few chapters in, you bring up the example of the Apple Store as a bit of a case study, and I'll quote you here. Consider the Apple Store. It sells fewer brands than Best Buy, stocks fewer products, and has fewer retail locations. But killer high-tech hardware isn't the secret to success. Rather, it's the chain's relentless desire to understand consumers' pain points and offer them meaningful solutions instead of empty sales pitches. You've captured the Apple Store very well in just 2 sentences, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I think what's important to keep in mind with the Apple Store is that you can buy those Apple products, that hardware, at hundreds of other retailers, thousands of other retailers. It's not unique to that. But what the Apple Store does better than anything else is know its end user, understand its customer, puts classes in place, puts in courses, allows people to go up and ask questions. Those genius bars, I think that everybody realizes are pretty genius now. Not a lot of retailers realize that that was an important piece of it back in the day. And actually, when they took 30% of their retail space, when they proposed to executives that they were going to not stock products and not make sales there, but actually simply put people in place who could assist their customers and educate them a little bit better, that was pretty radical. They said, you're out of your friggin' mind. So somebody actually had to push for that at Apple. Even within a company full of innovators, that innovation took a bold leap.
And a large percentage of companies, I'm assuming, and this is with a broad brushstroke, that simply wouldn't get off the ground, right? As soon as you said we're not stocking major amounts of inventory, it would die on the vine.
Well, if you're going to say, I'm going to take a large portion of our inventory and potential sales, and we're just going to put it to the side in hopes that we'll play a longer-term strategy and get more people in the store and get better word of mouth and get more brand loyalty. It's a hard sell, especially when you're trying to make sales numbers every quarter.
Speaking deeper to the overall strategy, you say that it's dare to do things differently, accept you may not succeed, and keep pushing forward regardless. This is notable primarily for the fact that it received pushback. Well,
that's right. Yeah, you have to keep in mind, even in the world's most innovative companies, oftentimes failure is seen as anathema. It's something that to be avoided at all costs. But in fact, if you look at the world's top innovators, they're very successful because they're willing to fail over and over and over again because they're experimenting constantly, they're tinkering with new strategies, and they're getting better with each of those successive efforts, like we were saying. So they really look at failure not with a capital F as this permanent, all-encompassing thing, but rather failure with a lowercase f, they tell me. So basically, it's the cost of an education. So you can make small, cost-affordable little bets, try new business strategies, new solutions, new choices and chances in your career, as long as you're able to not push yourself too far outside of your comfort zone, but take these little small baby steps, and you're willing to fail and learn as you go, you can be more successful in the end.
Not in the book, Scott, but I'm curious about your opinion as to, since we're holding up Apple as a shining example, or at least the Apple Store, if you've seen a continuation of this particular strategy, or any winds of change blowing there since their major transition in the last few years?
Yeah, well, I think you can see the winds of change blowing there. I think you can see it very readily at other major competitors, Amazon, Google, and the like. I mean, what's fascinating about the world's top innovators is that they really don't keep doing the same thing over and over and over again over time. And if you look a little bit deeper, they have labs, they have prototyping laboratories inside, and they're always encouraging employees to come up with new ideas, new strategies. Apple in particular is always touted as that big example of a top innovator, but usually in successful companies that are great with creativity, they're great with innovation, what's happening is they're encouraging employees to take very smart risks and push in new directions and say, okay, especially when we're doing well today with specific product lines or services and we can most afford these gambles, this is when we're going to make those bets. But make sure we're playing a lot of these very smart bets. Not all of them are going to pay off, but in the end, some of them are, and they're going to help us pay for those that don't.
Next case study comes from Chapter 10 and what you call Rule 8, pick your battles.
Right.
Each year, the International CES is right between two great weekends of NFL playoff football. So the example you bring up is the San Francisco 49ers, and in particular, their CEO, Jed York. Now, the Niners had a bit of a down season this year, but your strategy that you lay out, I think, still very much applies to this franchise, and I'll read a little bit again. A lot of teams say their goal is to win the Super Bowl, and you're quoting from CEO Jed York. We want to be competing for it year in and year out as opposed to one season. You have to look at the long-term view and be able to make some mistakes in the short run to have the overall success you want. That is, to some degree, the antithesis of a lot of sports franchises or companies in our tech space, which is thinking short-term and immediate impact rather than sustainable and sustained success.
Yeah, well, I think you've summed it up in a nutshell, right? That could be any given company, that could be anybody in their career. Really what we're talking about is avoiding instant gratification, but really thinking about long-term strategies, right? We're talking about how do you build bridges to future opportunity, and sometimes that means you can't spend millions of dollars on that all-star player. Sometimes it means you're going to have to bring that second-string quarterback up, train him up a little bit, because if he can be tomorrow's talent, it can help you lead the team to future victories on a more consistent basis, and maybe as a more affordable bet in the end, maybe that's the one you got to play. In the same way in our careers, it's the same thing, right? Maybe it's going to cost some money to go back to night school, get that MBA. It's not necessarily going to be rewarding right up front, but in a few years you may find that it pays very big dividends. So really what we're talking about is taking risks that are very purposeful in nature and being willing to say, okay, I got to pull back and look at the bigger picture, because sometimes there's an opportunity cost involved with any given decision. It's not always a financial cost, but what are you giving up to spend the time, energy, effort going in a particular different direction? And sometimes that direction is exactly where you need to be headed. It's just a little bit painful up front to make that decision and go that route.
Now, when you talk about sustained success in sports, Scott, and whether or not to sign major players, I look to your hometown baseball team, the St. Louis Cardinals, which has faced that again and again and has still had sustained success. But that's an aside. I'm not a Cardinals fan, but I admire them. This, I think, is a good time to point out that the cover of your book features chameleons, which is a nice example, biological example of change, perhaps. But as it applies to this particular case study, when do you change? When do you adapt? When does that new innovative strategy become mainstream and you learn you need to change again?
Well, you always should be changing, day in and day out. I think that's the important lesson of the book, is to always be learning, always constantly be thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead and taking those steps that you need today to help you plot that course to tomorrow, to really think about how you're going to greet the future before it arrives. So, part of the piece about being the chameleon is constantly being able to adapt, constantly being able to acquire new skills. But really what we're talking about at the end of the day is being able to learn how to learn and being more open-minded and willing to experiment and try new things. And the most successful people you find are sponges. They're constantly soaking up insight from the world around them. They realize that things are constantly moving and going in new directions, which means that they've always got to look at how can they go in new directions as well, which means that, if you get into a comfortable groove, that's probably a bad sign. It's not so comfortable in the end. Maybe it's a little bit of a rut.
Well, isn't there a similarity to chameleons in that sense, Scott, that you're absorbing this new information and you're constantly adopting what you interpret to be the best or the most innovative, right?
That's right, that's right. You're constantly making decisions. I think that's what a lot of people miss, is you're not simply making a decision once, but you're making a series of hundreds upon hundreds of different decisions with each passing day. And what happens is you can create a plan, a strategy, but you constantly have to be revisiting it, because all you can do is change with the world around you. And that's what the world's top innovators are doing. That's what the most successful people are doing at the end of any given day. Really what they talk about is holding strong but weakly held opinions. Basically, you do as much homework, as much research as possible, make as much of an informed decision as possible, and you do have to make that decision. You do have to press forward. You can't wait until you have perfect information, or if the stars have aligned. But then once you've made that decision, you have to constantly revisit it. As you're getting more information, as you're seeing the results of your actions, you have to think about, okay, how can I do better, right? How do I need to maybe steer things back on track sometimes? And you're always doing that over and over and over again, those weakly held opinions.
So I think this is a good time to dovetail out of that, Scott, and talk about some of the particular tactics that you recommend in terms of preparing yourself to be in the right place and have the right capabilities on hand. Just to list a few that you share, focused on existing, emerging, and future trends, gauge the impact and staying power of each. Be curious, keep an open mind, ask questions, and this is one of my favorites, is avoiding fads. Again, that's the short-term versus long-term.
That's right. Well, you always have to be looking at that big picture, and at the end of the day, you can hang your hat on a fad. The trouble with a fad is it's going to fizzle out at any given point, right? It's not necessarily going to be a lasting opportunity. So really what you want to do is you're going through this process of changing and adapting and looking at new technologies and trends and think about which have the longest potential, and also as you work with them, right, really think about how does the process of working with them convey new skills, new opportunities, help me get out in front of where the market is heading, because the market can go in any one of many different directions. Really what you need to be doing is trying to anticipate some of those directions and thinking about what are some of the tools, technologies, skills that you can pick up or capabilities that you can put in place. Learning, insight, maybe it's simply being able to be familiar with new specific software packages or hardware. You really have to think about, if tomorrow is coming and it's coming on fast, what am I going to do to make sure that I'm able to greet it in an advantageous way when it finally comes?
Speaking of that, this delves a little bit into the fear aspect we talked about earlier, but I think this is a tactic that applies well. You say fear will alert you to potential concerns, but this caught my eye especially, Scott. The fear of losing relevance will propel you to keep seeking out new education, experiences, and opportunities, and remain constantly on the lookout to the horizon for the next big thing. Again, fear as a motivator and a driver to success.
That's right. Well, if you're hearing alarm bells ringing, there's probably a good reason why, right? So you can either stand there and say, boy, this kind of sucks, and keep doing the same thing over and over again, or you can use it as an opportunity to say, okay, maybe I need to think about what's going wrong. And actually, if you look at some of the most successful businesses, you find that they almost use that paranoia, that anxiety, that fear as an alarm system, and they say, okay, whoops, things may be changing in the marketplace, competitors may be coming out of nowhere, it's possible our products and solutions aren't as popular as they once were. Okay, what are we going to do differently right right here, right now, that can help us produce a better result. So they're thinking about, again, tomorrow, today, and what can they be doing immediately to get a different result than what they've been doing in the past. Because the trouble is, the more successful we are, the more we tend to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And that's not necessarily a recipe for success over the long-term horizon in a very fast-changing and highly disruptive world.
Since this book came out, Scott, is there one chapter that you wish you wrote, something that isn't necessarily included in here that you think should have been? And I know in the process of a book, a lot winds up on the cutting room floor, so to speak.
Right. Well, the one thing that I wish we were able to delve a little bit deeper into was the educational system, because I think one of the things that we're talking about here is training people to take more risks. And at the end of the day, to do that, you have to be willing to apply your own strategies, your own solutions. And what's happening, I think, in the educational system today is, you can get A's by spitting back and memorizing answers that other people have given you. But in a fast-changing, super highly evolving business world where there's no one right answer and anything can change at a moment's notice, really what we're talking about is people need to be more prepared to come up with their own solutions, right? This is why we see self-made successes continually achieving, oftentimes at the expense of traditional standouts that you would think. So this is why some of the world's largest companies may be having challenges when they're facing off against bedroom entrepreneurs, and it's simply because somebody was willing to say, you know what, I'm going to take a risk, I'm going to try something different. It's always been done a certain way. How can I make the decisions? How can I try new things that maybe can upend this? And I think what's fascinating, the reason I brought up the education system is I have a young daughter. She's about 6 years old, right? And if you look at that age, kids are fearless. They're willing to try anything. You put them in a room full of blocks, puzzles, games. They'll do, they'll tinker, they'll experiment, they'll figure out new ways to use them and give them a puzzle. They'll find any way they can do to solve it. It's going to be unique to any given kid. But by the time they're about 12 or 13 years old, we've utterly beaten that out of them, right? We talk about how celebrated entrepreneurs are, Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, right? These guys who are willing to look at a problem and say, maybe there's a few different angles on this, but somehow all we do for the most part is train people to say, we're going to spit back the same solutions that have historically worked instead of coming up with our own solutions and our own answers. So I really wish that we could have delved a little bit deeper into that one, but you know what? That's what other books are for.
Yeah, that's free content, if you want to know.
That's right.
Before we go, Scott, I want to thank everybody for coming, and I need to take a quick Twitter picture for everybody. So I'll put it up on my handle and on Scott's handle. I'm at Tyler Suiters. Scott is at A Keynote Speaker.
Yes, sir.
Give us a shout, retweet, and we'll tweet you back out and give you a follow. So thank you all for coming. Let me get a quick one over here and back here. Thank you all so much. And I do want to mention Scott will be signing books, and books are available in Gary's Book Club just to our left, so stage right, here in just off the CES stage. So thank you for coming. And Scott, a pleasure. Great look on your next book. We're looking forward to it.
Cheers. Thank you, Tyler. I appreciate everybody coming out today. Thanks.
Have a wonderful CES. Thank you.